Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out and bearing the elements. And welcome to the fourth Distinguished Speaker Series event. My name is Matt Kennedy. I'm the college's Director of Athletics. It's my pleasure to kick off a great evening of tonight's presentation, The Servant and the Shepherd. We're joined here by two great speakers, two of my good friends, Dr. Suzanne Nelson and Scott Jones. I know they're going to talk a little bit about themselves and take you through a little bit of their background, so I won't do that tonight, but I do want to say I've known Scott for I think 11 or 12 years and been a good friend and a good colleague of ours. When I went out and got hired here at Bryn Athyn College, he was my first true hire. Went out and got him like Roy Halladay. He was our big holiday signing. So I'm very excited to hear what they have to say tonight. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Suzanne Nelson.
So this evening, I have been asked to share with you the career path that led me to working with athletes, a little bit about what a sports nutritionist does, and then my philosophy of working with athletes within the context of servant leadership, hence the title, The Servant and the Shepherd. And you'll be hearing from my friend the Shepherd later. As the daughter of an athletic director, it was only natural that I wanted to participate in athletics. After all, I did grow up in the field house, more specifically in the wrestling room. One of my first recollections of nutrition and sports as a school-aged child was when I dutifully made cupcakes for my dad's wrestling team. And evidently, Mom tells me that I made dried flower arrangements for them as well, but that's a whole other story. I never understood why they always preferred the orange slices that Dad made for them before matches instead of the cupcakes. And it was only later that I realized what a temptation that must have been for those weight-conscious athletes. I also participated in ballet for many years and figure skating. And this picture was taken of me teaching a class up at the pavilion before the roof was on. And perhaps some of my former protégés are tuned in this evening. Whoops. Well, here's my overview. Here I am making cupcakes. I thought I would at least get a little, oh, cute. And when that didn't happen, I wondered. But on the screen, it looked like it was advancing. And here I am in my ballet dress and teaching skating way back when. Look how yellowed that newspaper article is. After attending high school at the Academy Secondary Schools, I received my Associate in Arts degree from Bryn Athyn College, where I played volleyball and lacrosse. And let me now take you back to 1980, where Pac-Man was king and the Post-it note had just debuted, and lacrosse was being played with wooden sticks. Here I am with a couple of my favorite teammates, Kristen Gurney, Pitt Karen, and Candy Rose Quintero. And we are trying to look quite fierce in this photo. I received a solid foundation in liberal arts and science from Bryn Athyn College that served as a platform for my next 2 years at Ursinus College, where I majored in psychology and minored in biology and neuroscience. And I think it's so exciting that today, if I were going to school at Bryn Athyn College, I would be able to stay for 4 years and major in psychology or biology. So things have changed significantly since I was here. Ursinus placed an emphasis on liberal arts as well. We were required to take a language, and one of my favorite courses, trivia question about me, was music theory. But it was in anatomy and physiology where we touched on nutrition briefly that turned my attention to wanting to know more about nutrition, and specifically nutrition as it related to sports. So I went on to graduate school to study nutrition. And in graduate school, I was thinking about what I would do for my thesis topic, and I wanted it to be something on sports. and I ran into Dr. Sarah Short from Syracuse University at the airport coming back from a conference. And it was a very providential meeting because she had written quite a bit on nutrition for wrestlers and other sports at Syracuse, and took the time to talk with me about her research. And here I am, an aspiring young graduate student, and I'm talking to the person who'd written all these articles that I had read and wanted me to follow up with her research. So it was a wonderful meeting that I never forgot. And I've always tried to pay that forward by taking time to meet with students that are interested in nutrition and have career-related questions and have asked me to be a mentor or to do an internship with me. After finishing my master's in clinical nutrition from Drexel and completing an internship to take my registered dietitian nutrition credential, I was asked to join a national group of researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, where they were studying the nutritional, metabolic, and psychological aspects of weight cycling. And this was funded through MacArthur Foundation and under the direction of Dr. Kelly Brownell. And my area of focus was on wrestlers and on rowers. And the reason I was asked to join the group was because of my thesis. So doing that thesis had really opened doors for me. And this was a defining moment in my career path. I'd been given the opportunity to work alongside some of the brightest academic minds in the country on this research grant. And I quickly learned what I didn't know and what I needed to learn. But most importantly, I observed that the most successful people are constantly learning. They didn't always have the answer to the question, but they were looking for solutions. And professional and personal growth includes just not knowing sometimes and continuing to ask questions. During a meeting, one of the senior researchers handed me a slip of paper that read, "You need a doctorate. It's your credential for moving to the next level." And very fortunately, I was given the opportunity to get my doctorate at Boston University on a scholarship while working as scientific director of clinical trials. Afterwards, I returned to University of Pennsylvania Medical School, where I completed a fellowship in adolescent medicine and also served as the clinical director of the Weight and Eating Disorders Center under the direction of Dr. Thomas Wadden and Dr. Gary Foster. Part of my clinical training was also at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And this was an incredible experience. I had the opportunity to direct the outpatient nutrition clinic. And I served some of the most incredible children and their families. What you learn from a child, especially one who's facing a terminal illness, really stays with you for a lifetime. And those kids came to the clinic, and then one day they stopped coming. And I remember every single one of them. I then spent time as chair of the Graduate Nutrition Education Department at Immaculata College, where I taught several courses and worked to redefine their curriculum to put in a research track for their master's program. And this was because of the fact that doing a thesis had opened so many doors for me, and I felt it was important that those coming to get a degree in nutrition education had that option. Up until this time, I had given talks on sports nutrition to professionals, to athletes and coaches. I'd had the opportunity to present research at national conferences, publish books and scholarly papers in scientific journals, but for me, there was this key piece that was missing. While I was so challenged by the idea of being able to ask relevant nutrition questions, I wanted to complete that circle by being able to apply the answers to improve sports performance. So I was looking for that application piece. I really wanted to be in the trenches working full-time with athletes. But sports nutrition at that time was barely on the radar. There were only 3 full-time sports nutritionists in the country. The first was Nebraska in 1985, and that was followed by Penn State in the mid-90s, and then a couple years before me, Georgia Tech. And so I had to add to this little graph the number 4 in 1998 when I became the 4th full-time nutritionist in the country when I developed a program for the University of Washington. And it was exciting. It was the first program in the Pac-10, now the Pac-12, but it wasn't easy. Establishing the program, I started part-time. There were lots of roadblocks. I not only needed to convince administration that I could do the job, I also had to convince them that nutrition played an important role with athletics. So the 4 of us were really pioneers. If you notice, it wasn't until 2007, there's a real lag time. It's not because we weren't doing a great job. It just took a little while. The next group really came in 2007, and now it has increased significantly. And as pioneers, we had the double duty of convincing them, as I said, that we were not only competent and could do the job, but also that there was this link between nutrition and sports performance. And nowadays, this group has the luxury, I think, of just convincing them that they're the right person for the job. We know there is that connection. I went on to serve as the nutritionist for the San Francisco 49ers and also was a consultant to the San Francisco Giants for a few years, and then was recruited by University of California, Berkeley to develop a full-time nutrition program there. Currently, I am here at Bryn College, and one of my responsibilities is working with a dynamic group of coaches and staff in the athletic program under the direction of Matt Kennedy, who you just met. And what a privilege it has been so far to provide nutrition education to a group of athletes who are truly students and athletes and play for the love of the game. And our goal is to set the standard in nutrition for Division III athletics across the country. To my knowledge, there's no other nutritionist working with a D3 program. So that's really exciting. So what does a sports nutritionist do? In a collegiate or professional setting, a nutritionist interfaces with a number of different disciplines. In sports medicine, you're working with athletic trainers, physical therapists, orthopedists, physicians. It really takes a village. It's a fast-paced environment, and everyone is involved, and it works most effectively when everyone is working together and is integrated. If everyone's in their own silos and not paying attention to the needs of the student athlete, then there's a problem. When everyone is in it together, it can work beautifully in support of the student athlete. And educating athletes not only requires a knowledge of nutrition and exercise physiology and medical nutrition therapy, but you also have to understand the sport even if you've actually never played it. And so I was lucky having had a dad for a coach, and dad as a coach, and also playing sports myself. That piece came very naturally. And first and foremost, as a nutritionist, we are educators. Within the context of helping athletes meet their physical and training goals, in a nutshell, a sports nutritionist teaches athletes the what, the when, and the why of what they need to eat in order to promote health and enhance performance. And I think this picture speaks volumes that no two athletes' nutrition needs are the same. We've evolved to sports nutrition being very individualized as the most effective way to help an athlete meet their training and nutrition goals. This involves taking into consideration training demands, weight and body composition, fluid needs, energy needs, medical issues that may be going on if the athlete has an injury or is recovering from surgery, nutrient needs, and nutrient timing. Example of this, this was a popular story because of the amount of weight that this player lost. So it was in the local paper when I was out at the University of California. But V was a very bubbly lineman who absolutely adored to eat. For his sophomore season, he wanted to make a bigger contribution to the team by being smaller, relatively speaking. So together we came up with a plan to help him lose weight and to be more productive on the field. And of course, I was concerned about his health as well. A major change for him was spreading his meals out throughout the day. He had decided that, well, if you want to lose weight, then you just don't eat all day. But he got so hungry at night that then he overate. And candy was his real weakness. I call it backloading calories, and I see that a lot with student athletes because they get busy during the day, they forget to eat, and then they end up eating all their calories at the end of the day instead of throughout the day to support their training and performance. And of course, we worked on food choices and on portions. In addition to counseling, nutritionists use a number of different education tools to help athletes understand the what, when, and why. There are cooking classes, which are a lot of fun, that help athletes understand how to fuel themselves appropriately. There are team talks, there are eating out guides, there's grocery store tours. It's a lot of fun to be at a grocery store when you have a group of tiny little gymnasts with you wandering through the store, and obviously people wonder what's going on, and you have the opportunity to educate them about nutrition for gymnastics. Or if you're there with the entire offensive line of a football team, people are definitely going to notice you when you're wandering through the aisles of the grocery store. It's been said that a proper diet can't make an average athlete elite, but a poor diet makes an elite athlete average. And for those individuals in professional athletics, they talked a lot to me about the importance of continuing to take the message back to college and back to high school, saying, I wish I would have paid more attention to nutrition. Because after all, as a professional, one of the things I would say to them is your body is your paycheck. And so they maybe would last a little bit longer in the league if they paid attention to nutrition, or they'd recover more quickly for the next week's performance or from an injury if they were paying attention to nutrition. And you really could see some athletes make that change to being just average, to taking it up to the next level when they paid attention to their internal gear or their nutrition. At both the collegiate and the professional level, I've been responsible for working with food service and catering, along with chefs, to develop training table meals. And I would always say, well, it's my responsibility to make the menu nutritious, and the chef needed to make the food delicious. Whatever the venue, the bottom line is to provide athletes with appropriate food and fluid choices to support performance. And it's also a great time for hands-on education, just sitting there with the athletes and talking about what's on their plate or walking them through the line. And one of my favorite experiences with regards to training table was getting a call from the front office of the San Francisco Giants, where they asked me to come over and take a look at what was going on in the clubhouse. And as you'll hear later, baseball has crazy hours, and it doesn't facilitate healthy eating. And the Giants had never really looked at a formal nutrition program for their players. And so I came over and took a look, and along with a young spirited chef, we moved away from the donuts and the hot dogs and the greasy burgers and fries and nachos to some healthier fare for the players. And I think the headline here is that we ditched junk, well, mostly. So of course, we had some of that in there. We didn't take everything away. But players definitely felt a difference in the weight room and on the playing field as a result. Nutritionists are also responsible for meals on the road as well as at home. And this includes pre- and post-event meals, snacks, working with the hotel, working with the airlines. It was a fun experience to work with Delta Airlines. They were the charter for the San Francisco 49ers. And going down to their test kitchen and working with the chef to come up with very specific meals that we took on the plane for the players. The NFL's first regular season game outside the U.S. was in Mexico City. And guess who was on that trip? When San Francisco played Arizona, the director of football operations told me, "You have one job and one job only, and that's to make sure no one gets sick." No pressure there, going to Mexico City, trying to fuel a team for 4 days, along with the challenge of a language barrier, was certainly an adventure. And some foods got lost in translation. On the first day, I came down to breakfast with some frantic players saying that there are hot dogs instead of lean sausage. We have limes instead of lemons. We have Spam instead of ham, and mashed potatoes instead of roasted breakfast potatoes, to name a few. But we worked through things with a sense of humor, along with being able to taste some of the amazing ethnic cuisine that they had to offer. And the bottom line, no one got sick. Woo. Phew. Customized fueling stations that provide healthy snacks and beverages have become the norm to bridge the gap between meals and practice for athletes, particularly in college. And when I played sports in Bryn, Athyn, this was our fueling station in the assembly hall. Luckily, things have changed, and we now have a new fueling station in 2017 for athletes that was set up this past fall. Nutrition is also important during competition, and you'll find nutritionists that are on the sidelines and in the locker room. This is me working at the University of Washington, where I traveled with football and worked the sidelines and worked alongside sports medicine and helped them with promoting hydration to the players. And I actually watched those that were, we had a number of players for a couple years that were very cramp prone. So it was my job to make sure that they didn't miss a down by getting a cramp. At the University of California, Berkeley, I implemented a Take 3 program at halftime. Athletes would come in and they would be eating and drinking and trying to pay attention to the coach and talking about strategy, and the coach got frustrated because they weren't paying attention, and the athletes were frustrated if they weren't allowed to eat or drink. So we took 3 minutes to come in and have them sit down, have something to eat and drink to refuel, and then they talked game strategy. And coaches really bought into this process because it translated into athletes having more energy in the second half and paying closer attention to what they had to say in the locker room. My philosophy of working with athletes has always been athlete-centered. This is the approach that I've taken, and this is the approach, this is a slide that I showed you before, where if everything is working well, everyone is centered on the athlete. And my philosophy is in part based on the principles of servant leadership by Robert Greenleaf, and I'd like to speak briefly on 4 of those principles as they relate to educating athletes. The first is to value diverse opinions. Servant leaders value everyone's contribution. And in athletics, each member of the high-performance team has a different perspective. And you can see that there's one individual sitting at the table who doesn't look like the rest. When I was hired by the 49ers in 2005, I was only the 3rd nutritionist and 2nd female in the country to work and travel with the team. When I looked around a room, I had to laugh. I was the only female in the weight room, in meetings, at meals, on the bus, in the front of the plane, in the back, I guess in the front of the back of the plane. And I was very fortunate that the head coach valued servant leadership. And as a female, my voice was heard. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It wasn't easy. Not everyone was a believer at first anyways. But from my female vantage point, I was able to offer coaches a little bit of a different perspective, a way of thinking about a situation. It may have been why an athlete was struggling with a weight issue or fatigue on the field. The point is that even in this male-dominated sport, they came to value the female perspective and relied on me for that perspective as part of the staff. Second is the importance of cultivating a culture of trust. There was a big sign hanging in one of the coaches' office that I've always remembered that simply stated in big, bold letters, trust. One of life's greatest rewards as a sports nutritionist is having an athlete tell you that you made a difference in their life because you were real and because they could trust you. It's especially heartening when they come back to college and seek you out and come to your office and tell you that. And it may not even have anything to do with nutrition. How individuals present themselves, especially those in the public eye, may or may not appear to be who they really are. Behind a tough exterior, a brave face, or a brightness may be sensitivity, insecurity, or darkness. We all have personal challenges, and it's important to remember that athletes are no exception to that. When you're trustworthy, though, and you truly serve your team, athletes will openly discuss their challenges with you. And being your authentic self goes a long way towards helping others recognize their authentic selves. Just leaving a piece of yourself in conversation with others can make a difference. Because of trust, in addition to helping athletes make nutrition changes, I've been able to help athletes get treatment for issues that can be connected to nutrition, like depression, anxiety, or substance abuse. Because of the stigma that sadly exists in our society, athletes with mental health issues fear appearing less than, or a failure, or as weak to their fan base. And as a result, they may go to great lengths to hide their issues. Even when they know they need support, they often resist. They've said to me, I can outthink depression. I can outrun anxiety. I can outlift my alcohol overconsumption. But of course, you can't. I've been privileged that they've trusted me to help them take the next step to get treatment. And this really all goes back to the idea of trust. Servant leaders care about people's lives, not just their jobs. And I love this quote by Theodore Roosevelt, that people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. My mantra has always been to respect the person as an individual as well as an athlete. It doesn't matter to me if a player is the star on the team or on the bench. I treat them all the same. That's why I have chosen to have no autographs, no pictures of me and famous athletes, and you won't hear me name dropping. I have to say I come by that philosophy honestly. I absorbed that from my dad, whose former athletes tell me that as a coach he was tough but fair, and he always treated everyone the same, whether they were a champion or not. And lastly, encouragement. I'm an educator that embodies the philosophy, let's go do it, not you go do it. Because of that, I've always loved the nickname Fuel Coach. It sounds so motivating and positive. And maybe I'm a coach in my second life, I don't know. Whether someone is helping to improve you learning how to pick up ground balls in lacrosse, or making better food choices, coaches are there to encourage and advocate for you. They want you to succeed and perform at your best. They know that the effort can often be more meaningful than the outcome, and that the desire to do well comes from within. And because nutrition involves behavior change, it often takes time, practice, and there are going to be twists and turns and bumps along the road to a successful outcome. In essence, healthcare is a service profession. As a sports nutritionist, you're in a position to help athletes meet their nutrition needs through assessment, education, and implementation of proper nutrition practices. However, within the framework of servant leadership, it's not as much about what a nutritionist does, but why and how the nutritionist serves. It's not about personal gain or self-satisfaction. It's about being an educator and a good listener that focuses on how best to meet the needs of the individual athlete in front of you. My thanks goes to all of the athletes that I've worked with, because they have taught me how to successfully and effectively support them. Within an environment of inclusivity and trust, they've had the courage to open up and share their goals and their struggles, their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's put me in a position to help them. It's always a humbling experience to be given the opportunity to hold a piece of an athlete's dream in your hands, and I'm not going to fumble. I owe it to them to give them my best, and I owe it to them to get their best. In addition to the athletes that I've worked with, I'd like to acknowledge the many individuals who've supported my professional journey, especially my parents who are here this evening, Ron and Marianne Nelson, and my brother Gregory, who's with me from above. I'd like to close by reading the following quote by Swedenborg. "Charity, therefore, is an internal affection, from which a man wills to do good, and indeed without any desire of recompense. The delight of his life consists in doing such good. With those who do good from an internal affection, there is charity in everything they think and say, will and do." Thank you so much for being here tonight, and for those of you on streaming live, for listening to my professional journey.
Okay, so I was honored when you all asked me to speak tonight. I get a chance tonight to tell you a little bit about my story and my journey in athletics and how it's changed my life and how I can bring that here to Bryn Athyn. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story of the shepherd. Okay, but first we're going to start with a little historic background. History is important. So we're going to talk a little bit about who I am, where did I come from, and how did I get here? The impact of athletics on my life, and the integration and experience into sports medicine practice and management through that experience. And experience for me is huge because it's something we don't look at quite like we used to. Okay? Who am I? I'm Scott Jones. I am the Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Medicine here at the college, and I'm the Health Services Coordinator. I have a master's degree in exercise science, and I'm a licensed and certified athletic trainer. Originally, I'm from Terryville, Connecticut, and we'll talk a little bit about that because I think history is really important. And how did I get here? I took a very long 20-year professional journey and have worked at a lot of levels. Professionally at the pro level, colleges, high schools, middle schools, over 20 years. So Terryville, Connecticut, a place that probably nobody's ever heard of other than Eli Terry. And who was Eli Terry? Well, Eli Terry made locks and clocks. And probably the guy you have heard of is the guy who bought his clock business, Seth Thomas, which is Thomaston, right next door. In Terryville, there's one main street. There's the lock factory, which my mom worked at. And there's a water wheel, and there's not much else going on there. If you're from that town, your parents are working class, My mom worked in the lock factory, like I said. She also made floats for submarines, and my dad was an auto worker. So, naturally, you think your path is going to be in a factory or joining the military. That's typically what happens to kids in that town. The early influence of athletics in my life, as you can see, I was a bit of a heavy-set kid. So can anybody guess what my first sport was? Anybody want to take a crack at it? No, not quite. It was cross country. Believe it or not. I had a principal who came to town, took over at the middle school, and who did he recruit first? The 2 heaviest kids in school. Because he wanted to make a point. He wanted to prove that athletics could change your life. So me and Mike, the other heavy kid in school, who people made fun of, started to run. We lost weight. Other kids started to run with us, and that's how we started our cross-country team. I then went to high school at St. Paul Catholic High School, which is kind of an awkward story where my best friend said, hey, why don't you come to St. Paul's with me? We'll take the exam, and we'll take a look at the school together. Well, he didn't show up for the exam, and I did, and I got in. My main reason for going to that school, it was a Catholic school. Religion wasn't very big in my house. I went there to play football, to be honest with you, and that actually changed my life. In this picture, you can see we had a few seniors. We had about 8 seniors. And on my team, we ended up playing with 11 kids both ways, and had a very tough team, and I learned about belief at that school. And the power of 53 is what I'll talk about a little bit, and I'll wrap it around in the end of this lecture too. The power of 53. 53 was my football number, okay? And I started to believe in myself through athletics. I went from a very heavy-set kid to a more fit kid who was better in school when he was performing in athletics. And sometimes that happens with athletes. So, injuries and a new way of thinking. Well, one day a week, an athletic trainer rotated through my high school. And playing football and being 160 pounds and playing both ways wore and tore on my body a little bit. I had a brachial plexus injury. I had to be a bit of a technician as a 160-pound offensive lineman. Well, that technique is what actually caused my injury. So I would put my head across to make a block, and my arm would go numb. My shoulder would go numb. I couldn't feel my hand. And this athletic trainer said, hey, I think I can help you fix this. So I was one of the first kids in high school sports to wear one of these McDavid cowboy collars. And it actually wouldn't let my head slide over to the side and pull on that nerve. And it helped a great deal. And Paul and I became friends. And Paul took me into the clinic and showed me around, and I got interested. Now, to wrap around with that a little bit, the joy that I have with Paul being my athletic trainer and helping me in high school. His son now goes to Bryn, Athyn, and I get a chance to help his son now. So, Paul introduced me to exercise science. And as you can see, exercise science can be relatively confusing. Okay? There's medical and allied health fields. There's research sciences of biomechanics and motor development and motor learning. There's business with sports management. There's the social sciences, where they talk about sociology and history and philosophy and psychology. Okay? There's teaching, pedagogy, and adapted physical education. So, it can be very confusing when you're 18 years old and you're trying to decide what direction you're going to go in your life. Especially when exercise science really is the liberal arts of sports. Okay? So, what I did know was that there was challenging opportunities. I had a chance to specialize and integrate the skills that I learned from participating in sports. I had the opportunity to use various skills for success, and that there was cooperation between the specializations, just as Dr. Nelson had talked about. The subspecialties provided me with an opportunity, okay, what I wanted to do was work in allied health. I wanted to work in medicine, and it was primarily in athletic training that I wanted to work. So sports medicine is concerned with the prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation of sports injuries. That is primarily what I wanted to do. But then when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, well, what profession do you really want to be in? Do you want to be an athletic trainer? Do you want to be a physical therapist? Do you want to be an orthopedist? A sports medicine trained general physician? Chiropractor, massage therapist, manual therapist, and even a nutritionist. So it can get very confusing when our students are trying to pick what they really want to do. Okay? So training to be involved in sports medicine. I went to California University of Pennsylvania, and I was lucky I did. It was the right school for me. Being from that small industrial town, somehow luckily I picked another industrial school. California has a nickname. It's called Harvard on the Monongahela, and they call it that for a reason, because steelworkers send their kids there, and coal miners send their kids there, and I fit in. But I was a first-generation college student and lacked some of the skills to get through. And I was going into a sports medicine program where 100 kids from around the country came in, and they only took 15. So I had to learn quick how to survive. And I was able to do that there. It was the right school for me. And then I went on to Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania to study exercise science. When you look at my degrees, my actual undergraduate degree is in education. And athletic training was housed in education. And you look at it and you say, how could that possibly be? Well, in the state of Pennsylvania, athletic training, most athletic trainers were teachers that were working at the end of the day. And they earned extra money by practicing medicine at the end of the day at these schools. Okay? And if you look at the history of sports sciences started with physicians and physical therapists and gym teachers and all of those people putting their 2 cents into the pot. And that's how we got this wide liberal arts view of exercise science. So an introduction to athletic training and sports medicine. What I do primarily is prevention, clinical evaluation and diagnosis, acute care, treatment and rehabilitation and reconditioning, organization and administration, and professional responsibility. That's a lot. That is a lot for anybody to take on. And if I told you I was really good at it now, I don't think anybody could ever be really good at every one of those categories. It's a very difficult thing to do. So you keep evolving through your career. Now, what this did when I studied it was actually set me up for what I do now, where I'm the health services coordinator. That's why some people look at you and you go, well, you practice sports medicine, but you're the health services coordinator? How could that be? Well, because I've always worked in this melting pot. And really what we're trying to do is to service the athletes and the students as best we can and guide them to where they need to go to get what help they need. So that's how it crosses over with my current job as the health services coordinator. So as you can see in athletic training, we get to work on the field, we get to do prep work, we get to do rehab, we get to do a little bit of everything. And it's never a boring day. It's always challenging to try and keep up with the pace of the day. So let's talk about my second degree a little bit, exercise physiology. The study of various physical demands on the structure and function of the body. Okay, the physiologist is concerned with both short-term and long-term effects on the body. Okay, it encompasses the fields of research, cardiac rehab, personal training, strength and conditioning. And let me tell you, some athletic trainers have alphabet soup after their name, and most of our professionals have alphabet soup after their name. You can't really tell what they do, but there's a reason for that. If I worked at the pro level, I have a lot of help. Everything's kind of segmentalized. Okay, if I'm an athletic trainer, I'm doing a lot of the rehab stuff. I'm doing the field work. But then we work with strength coaches. That doesn't happen at the high school level or the middle school level, where you don't have the money to infuse into that. So someone's got to step up to the plate and take that on. So that's what happens oftentimes is these athletic trainers and other professionals that are involved with schools get these varied backgrounds to try and help out as much as they can. Okay? But I went to Bloomsburg University. I studied under Dr. Swapan Mukherjee. He was a great little guy. His favorite thing to do was to shoot people off the back of treadmills. all right? So you would go to class, they'd hook you up on the spirometer, and they would run you on the treadmill, and either you were getting shot off or somebody else was getting shot off the treadmill. So who would not want to do that in class? Catch the spirit. So the story of the spirit, right after I graduated, I worked in a machine shop for about 6 months with my brother-in-law. Went back home, had a tough time getting a job. He gave me a job. I walked into the Waterbury Spirit in baseball, and I had a little bit of a background in school and baseball. When I was an undergraduate, they sent me down to Cocoa Beach with the baseball team, and I absolutely loved the travel. I loved working with those athletes. And then when I went and did my master's work, I wrote a thesis on throwing arms. So I had some experience, some knowledge. And I used that thesis as my calling card to get in with the Waterbury Spirit. I walked into the office, said, hey, I'm an athletic trainer, I'm looking for a job. And they looked at me and said, well, we just lost our athletic trainer and we're looking for somebody. So I had the chance to work in the independent leagues for 3 years with the Waterbury Spirit with George Samus, who was with the St. Paul Saints. And this other gentleman, some of you might know him, that is Jackie Hernandez. He made the last 2 outs in the 73 World Series. Wonderful, wonderful guy that I had a chance to work with. Had a great chance to pick his brain for a few years, and he really taught me a lot and got me ready for Arizona Diamondbacks. And how did I get my job at the Diamondbacks? Well, Mike Bertotti was our pitching coach. He knew the rehab coordinator there. He was with the White Sox beforehand. And he had actually called and got my resume moved up on the pile. And that was a big break for me. We still had to interview. I had to do about 6 hours of phone interviews with him, and I got a chance to work with the Arizona Diamondbacks. So, time with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Well, I got the job, told my wife we were going to move, and she looked at me and she said, where? We're going to go from Connecticut to Yakima, Washington, about as far across the country as you want to go. So I took her away from her family. Well, how much are we going to make? Well, we're going to make $18,000 a year. That's what we're going to make, and that's what we're going to live on. So that was my first minor league salary. It was a great place in Yakima. And after a couple of years, I got moved up to South Bend and had a chance to work with most of the prospects in the organization and worked there another 4 years. Had a chance to win a long season championship there and do a lot of things that I could have never done anyplace else. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about baseball, philosophy, spring training. Okay, Yogi Berra always said you can observe a lot by watching. Probably one of the greatest philosophers of all time. And on a bench, you learn a lot about philosophy, you learn about life, you learn about religion. These guys have great conversations on the bench, okay? One of the things that had happened to me here that I had learned about through baseball was the ability to talk to people. And when I had gotten here, one of the first conversations I had with somebody during a soccer game, I met a kid from Ghana. And I said, hey, you're from Ghana, aren't you? And he goes, yeah. I said, do you know anything about pluralistic ethnomedicine? He said, yeah, I do. He's like, how do you know about that? So I started telling him the story of how I wrote an English paper in college. So I walked into this English class, and the English teacher looks at me, and he looks at the class and says, all right, here's your assignment. You have one paper for the term, and you have to, write this paper. It has to be about 70 pages or so, and you can show up from time to time, and I'll help you work on it. It wasn't even like you had to go to class. It was the weirdest thing ever. It was a weird experience. And he said, but it has to be on Africa. And I'm like, I'm studying sports medicine. What do I know about Africa, right? So I start studying the medical processes in Africa, and I stumbled upon Ghana, how they have a pluralistic medical system, which means it's bifurcated, which means you can go to the city and go to the hospital, or you can go out and get treatment from the shaman. But somehow the two systems function together, okay? And what they talk about is biopsychosocial medicine. So I got a lot out of that paper because I implement now biopsychosocial medicine, which means it's biologic, it's psychologic, and it's sociologic, okay? So writing this one paper where you didn't even have to show up to class, well, Dr. McVeigh actually taught me a lot because it was a lot of independent research, and he actually got me ready for my thesis. So it was an amazing class, and I didn't think it was going to be. I want to tell you the story of the manager of the bus and the Buddhist. So this is Mark Haley. And like I said, you can travel across the country on a bus, and you talk to people, and you learn a lot from talking to people. So they were joking around one day about, talking about religion, and, I was talking to them. I wasn't very religious at the time, and talking to them about what I believed. And Mark turns around and he goes, "Do you realize you're a Buddhist?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." So through Mark, I started to read about Buddhism, and I kind of found my religion through Mark and through baseball, which is really strange, okay? So baseball took me on this very strange journey in my life. Now, what I want to say about learning to care for others. These are my children. This is not some small married couple. I have a 17-year-old, a 13-year-old, and now a 1-month-old. Wow. And Liam and Maura have really taught me about caring for others. And what I tell people now is that you really can't learn to care for others until you have children, because it tests you in whole other ways. And, learning how to care, and sometimes learning who's really demanding, who's the boss, and how much we care for each other. So, they were great in my life and really helped me learn how to be a better professional. And that's what I want to teach people, is that as you move along, people impact other people. We kind of spiral off each other into these weird and strange directions. Okay, the philosophy of practicing sports medicine. To be successful in sports medicine, you have to study, watch, learn, and integrate on every level with everybody that you possibly come into contact with, because there's so many different ways to do things. If you look at the way that my assistant and I work, she's younger, I've been schooled a little bit differently, and somehow we still find ways to bounce off each other and manage and do things well. You kind of have to check your ego at the door and kind of work through things with other people, especially on staffs of 6 when you're in baseball, where you get in. What people don't realize about baseball and spring training for sure is you'll get up at 4 a.m., you'll go sit at the table at 5 a.m., meet with the strength coaches, talk about 130 different guys, and then after that for about 3 hours, the guys are coming in for the first session of rehab, and you might not be working with a guy on your team, you may be working with a guy from somebody else's team. 6 guys are circulating around that training room, working with different guys, rubbing off on each other, and it's a different way to treat and think, okay? The other thing I will tell you about baseball is baseball is highly a Christian sport. It really is. Religion is deep in baseball. There's baseball chapel on Sundays, okay, where the guys go out to the dugout, and they bring in the chaplain, and they have service. When these guys are pointing at the sky, thanking God for hitting home runs, there's a little something to that went on that week. When you're treating people in baseball, sometimes there's a spiritual component. Maybe they want to pray before they start their treatments. All right, so that's where that biopsychosocial medicine wraps in. You got to give them time to set their mind to heal, okay? And however they do it. So you have to be very accepting of other people's ways of thinking and doing, okay? So I worked for a guy who worked for the White Sox for 23 years. His name was Greg Latta. So Greg would always give us these books in the winter. And I'm 26 years old thinking I should be reading sports medicine books. Well, Greg was very, very religious, and he would send you religious books, books about Christianity and different things, but he knew I wasn't very religious at the time. So he sent me this book called The Shepherd. He sent me one called The Servant, and I read them both in the off season and got very interested in them. And really what The Shepherd was a management principle. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit today about, how to manage athletes and how to manage people in this shepherd way of doing things. Okay? Greg was a great motivator. He was probably about 5 foot tall. He would stand in the corner while the 6 of us were running around the training room in spring training. Somehow masterfully would orchestrate that room. And we all believed in what he did. But some of you are probably sitting here thinking, I thought I was here to learn about working with athletes, and you really are. So I want to talk about how could shepherding possibly relate to how you work with athletes, okay? Well, think about a shepherd. It's one of the oldest professions, okay? He was often the wage earner paid to watch the herds of others, okay? And what do we do as athletic trainers? We watch the masses. We watch the herds of others. We watch other people's children. They're important parts of historical economies. They're cogs and wheels. Athletic trainers and people in sports medicine, nutritionists, are cogs that make the wheel go round. Okay? They normally work in groups, either looking after one large flock or each bringing their own, merging their responsibilities. And that happens in spring training. Okay? You will have a group of stretch group work going on, and each is called a work group. So you have 5 teams on one field stretching. The coordinator comes out and starts shifting people around. You know, guys are getting moved up and down on a daily basis to see where they fit on rosters. Okay? So those flocks are getting mixed, and you're trying to figure out how to work with people. Okay? And shepherds traveled with their flocks, and that's what athletic trainers do oftentimes. They'll travel to cities with their teams and continue to work with them. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the principles of shepherding. So here's the general principles. Know the condition of your flock. Discover the shape of your sheep. Help your sheep identify with you. Make your pasture a safe place. And then we talk about the staff of direction, the rod of correction, and the heart of the shepherd. So I know some of you are looking at me like, wow, we're really taking a left hook here, but we're not. We are not, folks. Know the condition of your flock. Follow the status of your people as well as their work. Okay? Get to know them one person at a time. Engage people on a regular basis. Keep your eyes and ears open. Question and follow through. Suzanne talked about trust. Okay? You have to build trust with your athletes. It's almost like being a salesman sometimes. You have to sell them that what you're going to do is going to work. Okay? I have failed in the past. I failed in my first month of spring training. A little bit cocky getting out of school. Hey, I know what I'm talking about. I read all these books. And then you take $1 million athlete and you start doing all your tests, and what happens? They get scared. Now they think they're hurt, and all they want to do is take a film. So sometimes you have to lay them on the table, sneak up on them, start to stretch them, start to do your tests when they don't even know you're doing tests. And that's what I learned a little bit from Greg, was that there's a different way to do things. Okay? Discover the shape of your sheep, their strengths, their heart, their attitude, their personality, their experiences. And it's different. Everyone is different. Okay? Your choice of sheep can make the flock management easier or harder. That's always true. Okay? Sometimes you can't pick your sheep. Sometimes you get what you get. But can you make them better? Is the other half of the equation. Start with healthy sheep, or you will inherit someone else's problem. Now remember, in 2001 when I was with the Arizona Diamondbacks, they were building very quickly. It was the fastest organization to go from inception to a World Series and win it. And part of the way they did that was they put together a good sports medicine staff and then drafted guys that were hurt in the first round, because you take $1 million athlete, get them for $100,000, and you do their rehab. That's how we were filling rosters at times. Okay? We were filling rosters with value. Okay? And sometimes we did inherit their problems, but we figured out how to fix them and help them and get them better. And the scouting had to work as well. Know the shape of your sheep. Okay? Do they fit in the fold? You do that in spring training with your athletes because they move them up and down rosters. Do they fit on that roster? Okay? Does it work? Is it an equation that's going to work? Okay? Help your sheep identify with you. Build trust by modeling authenticity, integrity, and compassion. Okay? Set high performance standards. That's what I talk about with my coaches all the time. Sometimes you got to be tough on them. Sometimes you got to set those standards. Be demanding and people will respond. Okay? Relentlessly communicate your values and sense of mission. I try to do that on a daily basis. You know, I'm jovial, I joke around, sometimes a little weird, but they buy in. And if you get them to buy in, they're going to do the things that you ask them to, and they're ultimately going to get better in the long run. Define the cause of your people and tell them where they fit in. Let them know where they fit in. Let them know what their job is, and they'll do it. Okay? Let them know if they're not fitting in and how to make those corrections. Remember that great leadership isn't just professional, it's personal. It is a very personal thing. Okay? You have to be a good leader, and you should try every day to lead that flock to the next place. This was my pasture for a while. This is the Keno Sports Complex. Okay? And there at the Keno Sports Complex, that's only half of it. Okay? The big stadium's Tucson Electric Park. It's in Tucson, Arizona. We shared it with the White Sox, so it was the White Sox and the Arizona Diamondbacks. And you can see how big your pasture is. And it takes a lot of people to make sure that pasture is a safe place. Okay? So making your pasture a safe place. Keep your people well informed. Infuse every position with importance. You know, I talked to Matt, our athletic director, about this a lot. And sometimes I think he thinks I'm a little crazy, but you know, if you ever read Lincoln on Leadership, Lincoln kind of did that. He infused every position with importance. He built cabinets with generals that were failing, and he just moved them to other positions, and they were successful in other positions. Sometimes you shift people around, but you infuse every position with importance. You take their strengths and you move them to other areas. Okay? Cull chronic instigators from the flock. Well, people who don't fit in, they get cut. They go home. Okay? And they do cull chronic instigators. Okay? Regularly rotate your sheep to fresh pastures. That's another thing they do. They move them up and down the rosters. Reassure the sheep by staying visible. Be seen. Sometimes I can stand in the back. And you saw kind of we had this 4 fields they call the clover leaf. And most of the ATCs, the trainers are standing in the middle, being visible, but they're not on any one field. And they're ready to respond to anything. I'm around. Sometimes you won't see me, but I'm around. And they don't need to know I'm around. They just need to feel that I'm around and know that I'll be there when they need me. Don't give problems time to fester. Sequel any of those problems that happen. You know, educate people, help them make a change that takes them in whatever direction they want to go into. So we talk a little bit about the staff of direction. Okay, not really changing here. There we go. The staff of direction. Know where you're going. Get out in front. Keep the flock on the move. Okay, you know, set the path. Stay out in front of what you're doing, and get the job done. When correcting, use persuasion rather than coercion. You know, it doesn't work with athletes to crack the whip on them. Sometimes you have to persuade them to do things. But do it gently. You know, you can take a kind of a gentler step to get them to where they need to be. Give people freedom, but make sure they know where the fence line is. Set the boundaries. Okay? When they get into trouble, be the one that goes and gets them out. Help them as much as you can. Remind people that failure is not fatal. Failure is a process. Okay? I have failed a ton in 20 years, and I will never cover that up. I've been very successful, but I've made mistakes, and my mistakes have usually led to my successes. Okay? The rod of correction. Protect, correct, and inspect. Fight for your sheep. You can see the shepherd here, you know, fighting for his sheep with his staff where the wolf is. You know, sometimes step out in front and help out your athletes. Discipline is teaching. They may not know that you're teaching them when you're disciplining them sometimes. And I like to tell my athletes, sometimes I'm mom, sometimes I'm dad. All right? But I'm trying to teach you the whole way through to get you to where you need to be. Inspect. Know their progress. If they're not making progress, make changes. Okay? Help them. The heart of the shepherd. And yes, the Dalai Lama has a baseball card. It's in my office. I can show it to you. It's probably one of my favorite baseball cards. Leadership is a lifestyle. Every day you have to decide who is going to pay the price for your leadership. Okay? For me, in my mind, it's me. I make impactful decisions on people. I'm not going to be the guy that plays the blame game and says, it wasn't my fault. No, I accept that responsibility, and my athletes follow me because I accept that responsibility. Okay? They know. Okay? Have a heart for your sheep. You know what? I feel for almost every kid I work with, and I always have. I like to live vicariously through them sometimes. I get to watch them on TV still, hitting home runs in special places, throwing pitches that matter. And even here, I live vicariously through my student athletes. I'll kind of share a short story with you about Bryn Athyn last year with hockey. We played that last game last year at Nationals, and we were down 5-1. And those kids stepped up, went back out, and nearly won that game. Right? They lost that game 6-5. And when I went in afterwards, I told those kids that I would give up my World Series ring to go on that ride with them again. And I would. Because that's really what it's about. It's about the experiences that you share with those athletes. It's about, when they're done with being athletes, where are they going next? And that was my journey. I was done being an athlete in high school. Where am I going next? Okay, and that's why it's so important to me. The power of 53. Here's where we wrap around that power of 53. That power could be any number, whatever your athletic number was, that faith and that belief in what you do. But I have a question for you, because 53 was my number. But how many people are on a NFL roster? Does anybody know? 53. There's 53 guys on an NFL roster. And it's usually that 53rd guy, as you can see here a couple years back with the New England Patriots, Mr. Butler, that 53rd guy that steps up and makes that play. So that entire roster matters. Okay? Late in the season, it's guy number 46, 47, 48. It's the guy that got added to the roster late that's usually going to be special and help you out. So that's why you try to work with every one of those athletes and try to help them to get you to where you need to be. That number one drafted athlete, that Division I athlete that's a high-level guy or girl may go down, and the next kid, male, female, has got to step up. It's always got to be that next person up philosophy. Okay? So, the culmination of philosophy and practice. Use all of your skills and knowledge to achieve the student-athlete's goals in a safe and effective manner. That's what we're after. We're student welfare people now at the college. Before it was at the pro level, and it was, how do we get them to where they need to be? It's player development. For me, I bring a lot of that player development philosophy down to the college and try to develop them as people. Now it's people development. It's not just player development. Okay? Be empathetic to their needs and serve them well. Okay? Teach them everything you can. You'll see them again. And I guarantee you'll see them again. If it's not in person, I see them on Facebook having successes. I see them, people emailing me having successes. Maybe they're coming back and talking to you about, what the next step is. But you'll always see them again. They're never gone from your lives. Okay? So, I love this philosophy. Okay? Think for yourselves and live for others. When Suzanne and I sat down and put this lecture together, we talked about, service and leadership. And for me, being a shepherd, being out front and trying to lead them. And that's kind of how we put this all together. And that was those were the messages we wanted to convey tonight. So thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me here. So.
We're all set. Oh, there it is. Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Nelson and Scott. For those that don't know, Scott was my athletic trainer when I coached hockey at Newman. We've had a lot of those conversations on philosophy on those bus rides. I think I was sitting here over the years, I was doing a little bit of math. I think Scott and I have done about 80,000 miles on coach buses and ate a lot of terrible food and things that Dr. Nelson probably wouldn't love that we ate. But does anybody have any questions for Scott or Dr. Nelson? I know we've got some of those back at home that may have questions as well.
So this question is for Suzanne. You said you changed some meal options for athletes. How much resistance did you get when you were taking away the junk food and replacing it with the healthier options in the locker rooms and things like that?
Well, it can depend. Can you hear me okay? Would you like me to repeat the question, or do you have the question? Okay. It really depends on the team and the buy-in of that team to making those changes, and sometimes it's related to how they're performing at the time, and if things aren't going well, coming in and infusing some changes, whether it's in the athletic training room or in the weight room or from a nutrition standpoint, they'll see a difference, and so they're more willing then to move forward. But I think in the case that I talked about with the San Francisco Giants, there were some that were resistant. There's no question that they have their own way of doing things, but there's always flexibility, and food is to be enjoyed, and it's supposed to be fun. It's just with some of those foods, the timing isn't best relative to when they're playing. So we would make changes in timing of food intake, and then, sort of the 80-20 rule, they would have some of those other items. Not right before practice or right after from a recovery standpoint.
Question up front.
I was deeply struck by both of your speeches and how incredibly holistic your approach is. And it seems almost that it's holistic because you had to experience so many different playing fields, excuse the pun, but in order to get this bigger, broader approach. But I kept thinking, these guys should be coaches, not, like I want you in the space with the athletes themselves on a more regular basis. And I'm wondering whether you have a chance to actually build relationship with the coaches themselves and actually to impart some of your wisdom about the servant and the shepherd that are really pretty amazing.
Well, the truth of the matter is we do impart a lot of that on our coaches. As far as baseball goes and as far as what Arizona's philosophy were, they saw athletic trainers as the end of the bench coaches. So we were watching the tail end of the bench where they were doing the strategy and putting people in, and we may be conveying down the bench, hey, this is going on in the pen, this guy's ready, this guy's not ready. So yeah, do we kind of function as coaches sometimes? Sure, we do. Here, we always talk about student health and welfare, and we're coaching student health and welfare. That's what we're doing here. We get the trench stuff with the kids. Suzanne and I both get our meetings with our students and get to talk to them one-on-one about a lot of things, and then maybe the one that's advocating to the coach about whatever change needs to be made for that kid to have success. Would you agree?
100%. And thank you for your kind words. I love the fact that that's the sense that you got from our talk, because that's what we were trying to convey, is that you're really approaching the athlete from a number of different experiences and from a number of different angles. And I think for me, I'm happiest when I'm in the trenches, when I'm one-on-one with an athlete, when I see them light up and I'm able to help empower them to make a change. And I think Scott is the same way. We share that philosophy of just really loving to work with young people and making a difference in their health, in their well-being, first and foremost, and then in their sports performance. Thanks for that question.
Suzanne, I'm just curious about what the alphabet soup after your name stands for.
The Doctor of Science and registered dietitian nutritionist. It used to be just RD, and now you get to pick RD or RDN. The RN was already taken when talking about nutrition, so that's hence the RDN.
Oh, I have a bunch of questions. I'll start up here with Hilly. I feel like Phil Donahue.
Hi, so I have some experience working with girls mostly, and I found that they get terribly inspired by making changes nutritionally, and at times their desire to please you and to take things forward leads them to overdo it. And I wonder if you have some experience of that with your athletes and how you manage that when they take things too far.
I'm assuming you're talking about eating disorders? Yeah. That could be the topic for a whole other talk. They're definitely out there. Yes, I have worked with athletes who have disordered eating or have frank eating disorders, anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa. It all depends on the athlete in terms of the approach that I take. It's my philosophy is that it's a team approach. It involves a psychologist, a psychiatrist, athletic trainer, a nutritionist. Sometimes administration has to get involved for the health and safety of the athlete. So it really is very individual specific in terms of the approach that I would take. But it's true for me in working with athletes and giving recommendations. I guess I haven't found, because my approach is very holistic and I have a broad brush approach in terms of all foods can fit type of approach, that I haven't seen an athlete, based on my recommendations, take it to too much of an extreme. I really get them when they've already taken things to an extreme, and then I'm trying to move them to be more accepting of food in general and feel as though it's not the fattening enemy. You want to add to that?
I probably could, because those are difficult circumstances. So I would say in my position, it's knowing how to put the team together to treat the person, and knowing when to concede, not to think that I can treat it myself, and know how to put that team together and say, hey, you might need counseling services. You might need to speak to the nutritionist. You might need to see our nurse practitioner and get some labs. You may need to do some different things. So it's how we put that team together that really matters. It's not necessarily, you or I being the end-all to be-all and just treating them ourselves. Sometimes it does take that army to get the correct results.
I have two final questions right here. I'll go to President Blair and then.
Both of you have been at the pinnacle of professional sport. In other words, you've been able to do things as a boy I dreamed about, being on a Major League Baseball field or a National Football League field, going up and down the sidelines, talking to the players, or going on the team bus. I mean, that's what we all have little fantasies about. But yet today, you're here at Bryn Athyn College. And I have to ask both of you, why are you here versus where you were?
Thanks a lot, Scott. Because actually, I can answer this really easily. With all of those experiences, it's been amazing. It has been like living the dream, and a lot of people say that to me. These are things that not many people have had the opportunity to experience. And I'm so grateful and feel so blessed for all of those opportunities. But I'm at the point where it's really exciting for me to give back. And I've always loved to be a mentor, to give back to my profession in having students be interns, being able to give career advice because of those experiences. So for me, it's just a perfect fit in being able to give back through education.
For me, it's slightly different, where my career ran its course at the pro level. I had accomplished just about everything I could. We were going to go through a regime change. I was spending a lot of time away from my wife. You know, I had 2 children. It was time to come home. So that was the change out of professional baseball. And then the hardest level that you could possibly work at as an athletic trainer is the high school level, because those athletic trainers at the high schools are the unsung heroes, where they see 40 kids in an hour, and how they keep everything straight is unbelievable. And I'm not even sure I'm good enough to do that. But what I actually loved was the college setting, because I do get to practice everything that I do. I get to use all of my skills at this level. So for me, I will always throw credit out to the guys and girls at the high school level, because they work incredibly hard, incredibly harder than you could ever work at the pro level, harder than you could ever work at the college level, for what they have to take on, and especially working with the age of the athlete that they have to take on. Because not only do they take on the injured athlete, they take on the injured athlete, the parents sometimes, and everything else that goes along with it. So, like I said, I will always give them, you know, the props that they deserve, because they are phenomenal people, and to be able to do that is incredible. More incredible than the pro level. I'm telling you, it's so hard. So what I did was easy. This is easy too. So.
Well, and I'll just add to that. Yeah, I mean, the pros, it's a tough business, you know, and I think I come by this honestly too. I think from my dad as a coach, I love working with young people, and one of my responsibilities at Bryn Athyn College is working with the athletes. So I wear a number of different hats, but one of them is still to work with the athletes. And I think athletics at the collegiate level in Division I is sadly really becoming more professional, and the student athlete is getting lost. At University of California, I was very lucky because they really were incredible students and athletes. But in some other conferences, that's not so much the case. And being here, it's such a joy to work with this group of young people that are students and athletes and are out there giving it all they've got because they love the game. And I was so struck with that yesterday when I was watching women's basketball. They're out there just playing with such heart. And so I love being able to support that process and working with young people.
I think there was one more hand when I ran up the stairs over here. Was Mr. Do you have a question?
Yeah, actually, it's a good follow-up to Brian's question, because I was thinking what an impressive presentation this was by both of you, and how lucky the college is to have you. What a convoluted journey you both have had to get here. And Suzanne, you mentioned Providence. I think I see some Providence there in bringing both of you here. I was thinking while you were talking, Suzanne, about going back to the last Olympics and hearing people like Michael Phelps talk about how many thousands of calories he would burn when he's swimming for hours and hours a day. Do you have role model stories that you tell to inspire athletes, people like that who are so dedicated and really get it, how important nutrition is? And are there sports that are much more demanding than others for nutrition?
Great question. There are certain sports that are more demanding than others, depending on the energy systems that are being used and the number of calories that are being burned. They're all a little bit different. I'm not quite sure how to answer that in terms of one being more challenging than another in terms of fueling, because you have gymnasts who don't have a high calorie demand, but yet the pressure is on them to be very lean and have a certain appearance. Yet a swimmer like Michael Phelps the demand is quite high from an energy standpoint. He is consuming, 8,000. It got a little overblown initially. In terms of number of calories, I think they stated 12,000. It's more around 8,000 calories. Rowers have very high caloric demand. Baseball players, not as much. Catchers, yeah, I'll go with that. Football team, it's different based on all the different positions in terms of, different for receiver running routes compared to the offensive lineman. So that's why it's become so highly individualized, not only in tailoring your recommendations for a specific sport, but even position within that sport. And yes, I think it's great when you have a team where one of the leaders on that team is doing everything the way that you would like them to be doing things, from a rehab standpoint to a nutrition standpoint, getting enough sleep, and can be a model for the rest of the athletes on the team. But it's not always the case. There's always one that's, out there eating burgers and fries and ice cream right before they go out to play. And it's their natural physical ability that gets them through. Although I will say, I've observed the pattern, and maybe Scott has too, that at some point as they get older, not necessarily in high school and college, but as they get older in professional athletics, it does catch up with them. You often see those athletes who aren't paying attention to nutrition and to sleep and going and doing what they need to do for rehab, that they don't last as long, and they're injured more often and have other issues.
Absolutely, I agree. I want to touch upon the hero thing real quick. And I have a group of heroes that I had in 2005. So in 2005, you're in spring training, and I've got all these guys that we had lost the year before to West Michigan. We got knocked out of the playoffs, and all these guys got bumped up to AA and AAA. So we're sitting in the stretch with all the teams, and they're moving rosters, and I've got guys getting sent down to my team, and they're running over and they're happy. And I'm like, why are you happy you just got cut from AA? And they're like, because we're going to go back and we're going to win. And we're going to do this. And they went out that year and they won 93 games. And they won that league. And half of those guys are in the big leagues now. And that is my group of heroes. I am telling you, when you get cut and you have a good attitude, it's unbelievable.
Well, thank you to Suzanne and Scott, and thank you to you all for attending tonight, coming out and bearing the elements out there. Scott and Suzanne will be here to answer questions at the end, but we want to remind you February 8th, Dr. Eugene Potapov will be here for our next Distinguished series here in Penn Hall. But again, thank you very much. Thanks to Dr. Nelson and Scott, and they'll be here to answer questions following. So thanks again.